water that you're going to get from your grocery shelf is a number one container, but secondly, it will have sat in the warehouse next to who knows what. We test the distilled waters when they've come in, and I've yet to see one above 5.5 for pH. So you're starting out backwards already with putting a very acid thing in your system that you're mixing things with. Now it bothers me when I hear this thing about using steam distilled water. That's a joke, guys. All distilled water is steamed. In fact, one of the manufacturers changed their label of steam distilled because everybody was asking for it. And they think it's a big joke. You know, all distilled water is steamed. In fact, it's the water that's collected at the top of the steam vessel. You know how the water boils and the steam comes off? Well, in the distiller, that water that comes up as steam is collected. And that's the water that comes out. Now, that's good except for whatever else boils at 100 degrees will also come into that steam. So the things that don't boil at 100 won't come up there. They'll stay in the bottom of the container. But those that boil at 100 degrees will come with your steam water into your jug, which could be some of those trihalomethanes and a few other items that you don't want, vaporous kinds of things that were in the water to begin with. Now, what you hear people talking about is double distilled water. That's usually laboratory grade distilled water. That's very expensive. And it is used in laboratory settings for most of their experiments, etc., in terms of, you know, their use where they must be precise. And that is very specially treated distilled water in that they're sure there's nothing in it. So please don't get confused there in terms of distilled water. Now what Dr. Lorenzen has been able to do is, because everything that gets near water is picked up by water, if one could control, therefore, what the water is next to or introduced to, then I could put some good things in there too. And so what happens, we hear the word template. I would take something that's good, put it in the right quantity that I would like to have it emanate the right frequency, and put the water next to it. And now that's transferred into the water, because water has quite a memory. And it will remember what you put next to it. So if you start with a good distilled water, put next to it something good, then that will be absorbed into the water. And thus we enter the arena of homeopathics in terms of putting something next to that can be contained in water that will hold it. Now what he does is use a cold sterilization process and administer a very strong magnetic pulse to the water. And thus he has small clusters. So we've got that memory and we have that structure. Remember, that's important. And then we've added to it the right frequency of a particular element, a good element that you want in the water. And that's how that works. So when we talk about the water being in its clustered format, we are then translating to the water, who then translates to each one of those cells. It gives the message to each one of those cells what you want those cells to say. Now, what's the importance of that? Let's take a look at diabetes for just a minute. When I look at the pancreas, there's an enzyme made in the pancreas called trypsinogen. It's an enzyme. And in the small intestine, we have sort of the end point, or trypsin, is the final format that we want that particular enzyme that comes from the pancreas to be in, to be able to help digest our foodstuffs. Now, we couldn't account for that enzyme coming from trypsinogen to trypsin by simply saying, well, oh, just something happens in there, and I had trypsinogen, and now I got trypsin over here in the small intestine. Couldn't figure it out. Except through the equipment that we now have, we could measure, and we found out that trypsin was surrounded by 300 different receptors for water. in almost an onion format. They surround the trypsin enzyme. And there's a communication system, just like those ripples of water that go out when I drop something in the center of a silent pond and the rings go out. Well, by having a message transferred by a strong magnetic pulse to the pancreas that says, I need to make you into trypsin, that message is transferred ring by ring, water ring by water ring, to make it trypsin in the small intestine. Can you see what's happening there? He's actually making the water, because again it becomes a frozen crystal, very similar to the format of water at the bottom of glaciers. Now we know that the best water, the best structure for water that will carry information the best is coming from the bottom of glaciers. And what he has managed to do is to come up with a way to replicate that structure as if they're coming from the bottom of glaciers. And people, the latest thing out is that people are selling chunks of water coming from the bottom of glaciers. That's the hottest thing going right now. Some entrepreneur is now cutting chunks of water and is selling them for $25 a bag. So I'm sure someone will soon be up at Mount Rainier trying to get to the bottom of the glacier to cut the chunks out to sell. I mean, but it's that principle that we're working with. And I'm going through this because each one of these waters is made differently. We get to a similar endpoint because of the amount of energy, the amount of frequency that's translated in each one of these waters. So thus we're getting a healing effect. But again, remember, we're starting with a battery up here. So we're talking about electricity to begin with. If I can get the right electricity going to the brain, then that brain's going to begin putting out the right product. But I got to get the water to it first. So it has to be small enough to get there. Once it's there, will it translate down to the cells? See where we're going? And so we're moving up the scale here in terms of the way it goes. If I move to the next water for just a minute here, deuterium water. And what's the significance of it? In 1933, many of you were around to remember the development of, which is when the atom bomb, they began the development of it. Deuterium is an element in the production of the atomic bomb. Heavy water made from deuterium. Now deuterium itself is just what we call an isotope of hydrogen. It's another form of hydrogen. There are 3 forms of hydrogen. You can look at it as just ordinary hydrogen. You can look at deuterium as a second type of hydrogen within the hydrogen molecule, and tritium, which is the third type of hydrogen within the hydrogen molecule. The problem with the third one there is that it's radioactive. Deuterium is not radioactive. It is in almost every element on the earth. You'll find deuterium. You will specifically find it, or especially find it, in seawater. It's loaded with deuterium. So that what happened, Dr. Story, in his guilt from being one of the individuals that was responsible for development of the atomic bomb, decided that I better do something for mankind that might be useful with deuterium. He probably had, not probably, he had more incentive too, because all the scientists that were involved with the development of the atomic bomb all wound up having radiation exposure. And so they were getting sick and they were dying. So they had to come up with something that would keep them alive, including, he himself. And in the process of things, he developed deuterium from a healthy perspective. And what we find is deuterium comes in a couple different formats. It comes as deuterium oxide, which would be heavy water. And to be noted, D2O is the chemical formula for that. You only want a little bit of deuterium oxide in your body. Otherwise, that begins to tear the body apart. You do not want deuterium oxide. it will collect in the liver, it will collect in the fat cells, and begin to destroy the body. So please take note. You don't want heavy water in your body. What you would like perhaps to have would be deuterium sulfate, D2SO4. And in that format, as long as it is not in very, very heavy concentrations, we find that good things start happening in the body. And of particular note, tumors begin to dissolve. They begin to liquefy in a very short period. In fact, they're talking about a 30-day time frame for tumors to completely dissolve, whether they be cancerous tumors or not yet cancerous tumors. Deuterium has the other property of taking from water that's already in the body oxygen, but good oxygen. Now we looked at oxidation. Remember, we looked at the rust and the body rusting. So we don't want the bad oxygen. We want to tie that up. Deuterium releases the appropriate type of negatively charged hydrogen to tie up the free radicals, number one. But it also releases what we call a nascent oxygen that can in fact give oxygen back to the cells. Now, in ancient times, the Earth's atmosphere was 30% oxygen. It's now 14% oxygen. That's our atmosphere. We're living in a time of oxygen deprivation. You go into coma when the oxygen drops down to 10%. So we're in trouble, okay? Now, deuterium sulfate in the body has the property of releasing the good oxygen from the body so that, especially with individuals that are having difficulty with their lungs, they find that they're getting more oxygen in their cells, usable oxygen. So asthmatics, they're reporting that asthma is totally cured within a 2-month process. So you can see perhaps what's going on here. The thing to look for in deuterium waters is that they not be too heavy a concentration, that they be essentially homeopathic concentrations of deuterium sulfate. And some of you will remember shaking up the anabolic water, which is available on the market right now, and hydroxygen. You're shaking it just to stimulate the frequency of the homeopathic in the deuterium. It is a major player. You're going to hear a lot more about deuterium in the very short future. It's one of the better waters available, especially for cancer, especially for lung problems. And I'm going to group together here for diabetes also. All three of these waters that I've spoken of so far, the electrolysis water, the clustered water, and the deuterium water, are excellent for diabetes. We've talked about the clustered in terms of the communication network that's established by the way that's made. What we have found, again, this is all new research, in the diabetic, especially in infants with juvenile diabetes, they've isolated some viruses in their pancreas. Remember again, these organisms weren't supposed to be in that part of the digestive tract. They weren't supposed to be able to live. Well, they have found E. coli and viruses in that part of the digestive tract. And they suspect very strongly, again, they're resistant organisms, that is a cause for diabetes. All three of these waters will attack the pancreas, E. coli, and viruses. And thus we find that diabetics are responding very well to these waters. When we increase the frequency, it means things happen faster. So we start at one frequency, we go up higher and higher as I'm going down the scale here, so that things will happen with all of them. Some it will happen with faster than others. So it's like, welcome to a whole new world of water. And you can get a sense that there is something happening to the body with these waters. I'm going to mention for a minute the equator here, and Dr. Werner Kropp because I have to give him credit for a lot of the work in this arena. Dr. Kropp was a Swiss scientist who discovered all of this stuff around 1930. And he's the one that taught the Russians. And the Japanese visited him, and the Saudis and the Egyptians. He discovered zeta potential and started talking about zeta potential during that period of time. He went up for a Nobel Prize for several years, was turned down. But I've been to his place, as I say. These coinkydinks, I just happen to wind up in these places. And unfortunately, he was killed for his technology. One of the mafias offered $100 million for his technology. He turned him down. And within 2 weeks, he was dead. Now, I have actually seen, through the use of his particular little system that uses strong magnetic pulses in it. I don't know all the particulars about it because, again, it's a proprietary process. But I know that when we poured water that had cholera in it, we poured it through 3 times and that water became drinkable in terms of the infectious organisms that were in it. I know that a larger version of it has been used in Chernobyl, and when water has been poured through it, it was converted to IV solution. It was that sterile. So I know these things exist, and I must give credit to him for the initial pioneering work that he did. There are 4 scientists that so far have been taken away from us because of their work in these waters on an international basis. A word about crystal energy, which works basically on the same principle that the clustered water works. The question that we have with the crystal energy at this point, and only Dr. Flanagan can answer the question for us. Remember, I talked about that very sophisticated piece of equipment, that there's one of a kind in the world, and we can actually look at things at the colloidal level and see what's in them, whatever. We're noticing that there is a soap made from a potassium base in that particular element. And it is used to make the water cluster. The problem we have that when we add that type of soap to water, it means that the viscosity drops. When the viscosity drops, the pH drops. And that element becomes toxic. But again, you wouldn't see it through all the normal chemical analysis, through all the normal physics analysis. It looks good. We see clustering. We see effects on the body. It's the long-term effects that we have problems with. When we start talking about colloids, and again, now you know what a colloid is, and the importance of colloids in terms of being able to get into the cell. Very few things are true colloids, even though they're reported to be. In fact, we only found one that was truly colloidal when we examined it, even though on the label they were all said to be colloidal minerals. So that you want to keep that in mind. Silica that is not colloidal can be destructive to the cell. When it is combined with one of these bioavailable waters, it will pull things into the cell 10 times faster than anything else you could add to it. So it's fine if we're pulling good stuff in. It's not so good if we're pulling bad stuff in. You know, the Sufi water, they tell us environmentally works extremely good on cleaning up the environment. We're seeing that the petrochemical made elements, which means everything from oil and everything made from oil, are being converted and broken down to their most elemental parts, meaning you're finding the protein, you're finding the amino acids in them. And it is reported that it has cleaned up entire lakes with just using a small amount to just clean up an entire lake. It's a new kid on the block. Remember what I said in terms of the academic studies. Don't look for the academic studies. They're not there yet. You should see in short order from the intent of the individuals that have produced this water, and that they're about being harmless, that this water will probably wind up being at least as good as all the other waters that we've talked about. At this moment, most of the experimentation has been done with environmental elements like, cleaning up rivers and streams and environments. Again, you're nothing but a small representation of the bigger, so it should clean you up the same way. And the reports, at least testimonially so far, have been in the arena of it does detox. And digestive systems are cleaning up, so we are pulling stuff out of the system. I cannot say more on that yet because I haven't had a chance to really talk at length to the scientists working with it, nor the spiritualists working with it. But I expect something very good to come forth from that. I've tried to present to you some of the best waters in the world as far as their interface with human bodies. They do have the same effect on animals. They will have the same effect on plants. Remember the equation of life that I showed you. It all operates under the same principle. I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions from the floor. We do have a mic here in the middle of the room. We'd ask you to go to that so we can pick it up. And if you don't have any questions, that's fine too. But let's see if anyone has any questions. Would you go to the mic?
We can use the
Go to the mic.
Now it's very advantageous to use the micro water with the clustered water to make the clustered water.
Yes.
Dr. Lorenzen's clustered water with the micro water is better than the distilled water.
Yes. You can make the clustered water with the micro water. There's a lot of confusion in the audience about that. Dr. Lorenzen and I had a long conversation about that. It wasn't a long conversation, but we know, there's what's transferred over is good information to the water. He has very little experience with the micro water. The tape that he made, he says he has to get a new tape out. He has not had the time to do it. That was an anecdotal message that was said on that tape in reference to the hydroxyls. The hydroxyls themselves are in the acid water. They're not even in the alkaline water. Okay? Next question.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned good oxygen and bad oxygen in the body, and I've been waiting for somebody to explain to me the difference between, we take antioxidants to get oxygen out of our system, and then there's waters that are highly oxygenated, and so I'm not sure how those fit together. Yeah.
Again, if you'll notice when I talked about the deuterium waters, and I say it as deuterium waters because the anabolic waters that Dr. Todd makes is a deuterium-based water. We have oxygen that, again, would be destructive to the cell in terms of an antioxidant. And then I talked about nascent oxygen. When you can pull oxygen out of the water that is already in the body, that oxygen comes out as usable oxygen that is good for the cell and can get into the cell. When you talk about pulling free-running oxygen that is not tied up at all, then that is destructive oxygen to the cell. I didn't mention either, what about oxygen therapy? What about ozone? What about waters that have oxygen drops that you add to the water? They will start a process of burning up or releasing good oxygen in the cell. The problem is that it burns too fast. So what you're stuck with is this happens very fast, and then you've got all these toxins that have been released, and there's no way to get them out of the body. So that's the problem. Ozone itself can be converted chemically into a toxic element if it's wrong. So I would tend to stay away from them unless they're releasing from the water that's already in the body the type of oxygen that you want that will allow the body to grow and mend itself. Okay? I had another thought while I was answering that, and it's not coming to mind right now. Something else I thought about. But feel free. With Dr. Todd's other waters, the names of which just aren't coming to me right now. He's still working with those, and I tipped right over the ultraviolet. Boy, can't end without that. Ultraviolet itself has a good end of the spectrum and a destructive end of the spectrum. At the destructive end, there is damage to the DNA in the body, and as you know, that's one of the major building blocks in the body. From DNA, everything flows. So you do not want to be at that end of the spectrum. Dr. Kod Ovakaitis has developed an ultraviolet blue laser, and that ultraviolet blue, he works with an ultraviolet blue laser that you're going to hear quite a bit about in the upcoming future. Everything from its use in water, which would be at the good end of the spectrum in terms of introducing that frequency, which is a healing frequency of ultraviolet blue, to the cells by way of water. Again, water has a memory. If you're going to put a healing ultraviolet blue spectrum into the water, then that's going to be translated over to your cells and will help to mend the cells because it is the right frequency. So that's the thing to keep in mind there. We're using a healing spectrum of ultraviolet blue added to the water that in fact will even allow the water to vibrate at higher frequencies. And if we take it one more step, we're told that there are DNA strands in our bodies that we haven't picked up yet on a physics level because we don't have the technology yet to actually pick them up. But by deduction, by inference, there appears to be up to 12 strands of DNA that we cannot detect with the instrumentation we have now. And it is said that when we allow that DNA to begin to vibrate, that we can actually change the structures and disease processes within the body. That's probably the latest area and the hottest area of research on a worldwide basis. And in speaking with Todd, we're talking about even being able to change the frequency or the DNA going forward in generations, so what you pass on. Now, we have only known, literally, in the last 3 years, that you can change your DNA and the response of DNA to emotions. What happens at the moment of conception, wherever your mind process was, on that very night or morning, is what you transferred over to your son or daughter. That is now their DNA. Wonder why all the kids are different in your family? Well, where was your head at that moment when conception took place? We also know that the human body radiates at a frequency of roughly 6,500 angstroms. If your frequency lowers, then microbes, bacteria, viruses, and fungi are easily able to get into the body. We go to that unhealthy cell and they are pulled right into the center of the cell. Cancer patients, their bodies vibrate at roughly 1,875 angstroms. So that's quite a drop from 6,500. When you take one of these higher frequency waters, and the one that's been documented has been the deuterium water, you raise your body frequency to 77,000 angstrom. So you're getting an idea that we've got some tremendous things happening, and it's just water, folks. None of which is toxic to the environment, and it's not toxic to you, with all the reservations I've given you. But as you can see, all of these are made in different ways. When you start talking about storage, it's a matter of which ones will hold the longest for you. And I would suggest that on the cheaper end, store in your 55-gallon containers, store your micro water because it's cheaper by the gallon. Then take that and introduce to it to have available to you on the side, whether it's deuterium, whether it's clustered water, or any of the others, just to add to it so you're getting maximal frequency with it. If you're in a situation where you're worried about tumors or you're worrying about disease processes that you want to turn around rapidly, use the higher frequency waters. Again, hopefully soon we'll get some evidence on the Sufi water. The deuterium waters are excellent. The cluster waters are excellent. Again, they seem to be happening faster with the deuterium-based waters. They seem to be happening reportedly with the Sufi water. We'll see how it goes. I am running clinical tests now with those waters. Stay tuned. I'll let you know how they are. As most of you know, I don't just jump on a bandwagon. My intent is to be absolutely sure and to report to you what we find. I mean, I have no water of my own. It's a matter of just letting you know what the best are around the world and making them available to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.